and we are very excited to have you with us. Um, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to enter them in the chat box. We'll be happy to answer them for you. Also, we have a gardening playlist on our YouTube of all the other lovely gardening classes that our presenter Laura Matter has taught with us over the years. We're always grateful to have her and would love to do an official introduction. Laura Matter works for the Garden Hotline, has many, many years and expertise in gardening, and she is going to be sharing summer's bountiful secrets planting fruits and vegetables this morning. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Our weather was really like almost summery the last few days, and then today happened. We're going to
Right?
talk about that kind of thing. Yeah.
Good old Washington weather.
Yay. All right. So thanks you guys for joining. Sorry for the slight delay. I was moving a little slowly this morning. As I told Elizabeth, my partner and I ended up in the ER last night. Nothing major happened, but it was a little bit scary thing. And so everybody's good. But you know how that goes. You've been there. Um, it takes hours to get through the system, especially if you're low on the triage channel there. So I'm here with y'all today. I'm not not as late as I could have been considering. So thank you, thank you. We're going to talk about something pleasant though, which is how to grow stuff in the summertime, planting fruits and veggies. We're going to talk about concepts about that and how you maximize gardens and all of the things you should be thinking about this time of year, especially. Which is a lot of what we do in these classes with Marlene's is sort of look at the season and where are we and what are we doing here. So let's go forward here. All right, let me make sure it's working. Okay, garden zone maps. If you guys are not aware, the new USDA plant hardiness zone map came out in late 2023. And so they call that, you know, the 2024 new map. They obviously labeled 2023, but this is based on data that happened over longer than like a year. Takes some years to get in between the maps when they create them. Some things changed. So for Seattle, Seattle moved into a hotter zone, a half a zone hotter, because we have a heat island. I live in Seattle, so we have a heat island effect because of all the buildings and concrete and all of that. So that affects things as well as climate change affecting things. We have seen changes though across the country. So the zones have shifted a little for many people. But in Seattle, we're now 9A instead of 8B. We've been sitting in 8B for a long time. Many other areas in Western Washington are still 8B, but you can check the map and check for your location to make sure. The reason this map is important is it tells you what your winter extreme average annual extreme temperature could be, which will help you choose plants. And of course, with vegetables, we're a lot of times working with annuals, sometimes perennials, but any perennial things you plant, you want to make sure that they're hardy, or you're going to treat them as a annual because they just won't survive the winter. So the warmer we get, the less hardy some things might be. So it has effects. On the other hand, it works the other way. You may be able to grow things that you couldn't grow as well before. So some people have trouble with things like hebe or rosemary or New Zealand flax. They can be marginal. Rosemary actually is pretty darn hardy, but I have seen it die in weird cold snaps in winters in the Northwest. So this is a good map to be aware of. You can find it online. This image came off the OSU, Oregon State University site, but you can go in and look, and if you have relatives in other areas, you can explore what they experience as well. So updates that happened, the last version was in 2012. They were using data from 2005. So it took them 7 years to come to agreement to publish. Part of that was a little bit of a discussion about climate change, and there was reluctance to talk about it at the time. And so they finally did come out with it in 2012. But that's a long time in between when measures were used to create the map and when it was actually published. This latest one actually then uses data now that's cumulative from the 90s to 2020. So it's only been a couple of years instead of that 7-year lag, which is better. So we're closer to, what's actually happening right now. And the new version, as I said, you can explore. It's built as an online tool, so you can go online and look at it. You can use your zip code to pinpoint where you are. It identifies those cities, like I mentioned with Seattle, that create heat zones. And then it uses real weather data from actual weather stations like this. Oh, sorry, we'll get to that. Okay, it uses actual weather from weather stations, which we're going to look at in a minute. So first, I do want to point out that the Sunset Western Garden Guide, which many of you may have versions of, I have probably had multiple versions over the years. Each time a new one came out, and I know at our office where the hotline sits, garden hotline sits, we have all kinds of years of Sunset garden books. These are great because they have maps in the beginning of their book that show you different microclimates for different regions along the West Coast. So you can compare Washington to Oregon to California, but also you can compare living in the Puget Sound lowlands to living up in the foothills of mountains. And some King County kind of traverses that, as does Pierce County. And so we see versions of climate maps showing if you're closer to Puget Sound, you're gonna be a little warmer than if you're, up in the foothills, going up towards Mount Rainier, or going up into the Cascades. If you're over on the Olympic Peninsula, you get sometimes that rain shadow effect that happens in certain parts of it. But you have this big Olympic mountain range that affects people. So people living, higher up are going to have different weather happening in their region. So it's important to know that, and then you can fine tune. So that USDA map gives you sort of this big picture, and then you can use this to sort of zone in on where you actually are and understand how weather works in our area. We have a lot of cold winds that come in from the north. We're still getting a little bit of that. The plant sale, Tilth Alliance plant sale is happening this weekend, and one of my roles at Tilth is to actually buy the plants that we sell. And I then greet all the growers that come in and bring them in these beautiful, huge truckloads of plants. We sell about 50,000 plants each year in May at the Good Shepherd Center in Wallingford. And those plants come in from growers that are in King County and then up in Snohomish and Whatcom counties. And so we unload all these plants. We have to protect some of them, things like basil. It's still a little cold for that to be out. We had beautiful weather, 3 days of unloading, nice sunny weather. It was delightful. And then as I drove home last night, they started the sale last night with the early bird fundraiser sale that they do. And it started to rain. And we saw that transition happening as we were leaving. So weather changes on a dime here, as you know. We have to be prepared for that. We have to think about, what does that mean for my plants? If you're online on any of those Facebook groups, Pacific Northwest Gardening, there's a million different Facebook groups, many of which I follow. Sometimes I weigh in, sometimes there's 300 comments and I don't bother because it's just exhausting. It's exhausting to try to get in the conversation. But right now, all of the conversations are, did you put your tomatoes out yet? What about your peppers? I do this. I put cloches out. I do this. We're going to talk a bit about that because Everybody has an opinion on that, and everybody's right, and some people are wrong. There are some things you shouldn't do, and there are some things you need to be aware of when you're talking about growing things in the summertime, and especially as we are starting now to get our hot crops into the garden. Also, we get a lot of weather out of the Southwest. I'm not sure where this came from. I think it was coming out of the Southwest, because thinking about how things were blowing around at the plant sale yesterday, late day. And so we get these rainstorms, that come through what they call the Pineapple Express. Sometimes it warms things up. We get warmer rain, and that's not a terrible thing, but rain can also have an effect on your new tender little plants that you just put out there as well. Sunshine can as well. So remember, a plant that hasn't been out in full sun, you've been growing in your house, is going to be very tender and not like that sun directly on its leaves until it hardens on. So this is just an example of weather patterns down in the Puyallup area. I use this because we work a lot with WSU, and they have a extension site down there. And also it's a little bit more relative to South King County. But this is one of the things that get used, the kinds of data that gets used for building those maps. This shows how our rainfall is, and then how our temperatures are. So the top one is looking at temperature across the year in 2023, kind of like what the averages looked like. So that's actual data from last year. And you can see where the lows and highs are. You can also kind of compare that to the bottom chart, which is all rainfall in inches, and look at where there's no rainfall is where it's the hottest. And so we have this Mediterranean climate, even though we don't necessarily believe that, it's cold. We don't feel like we're in Italy and basking in the sun, but we do have that same kind of weather pattern where we get most of our precipitation in the cooler months, and it dries out in the summer. Our plants need to be set up for that. And even our perennial plants. So things like even big conifers that you're growing and have in your garden, you can see when you look at this, there was a little more rain in June. That's not unusual. We all, talk about the June gloom. April can be very rainy and sunny, kind of, mixed, and May often can be very nice. And so May may look really nice and sunny, and then we hit this cool weather in June, and we're all kind of bummed because we're like, we want our tomatoes to grow. However, that June rain and that June mist and cool is super important for all our big trees, like our Western red cedars and our Douglas firs, because it actually gets more water into the soil, which helps to hold them over that dry spell. One of the reasons we have conifers as a dominant tree in the Northwest is because we have this weather pattern. So we talk a lot about, our soils are acidic here. People think it's because we have conifers. Really, conifers are here because the soil is acidic. Conifers are here because they can withstand this kind of dry summer because they have waxy, tiny needles or leaves, scale leaves, and they can handle that. We don't have all those huge big broadleaf trees native to the Northwest like you see on the East Coast. And that is because they get a ton of rain in the summer. They get heat and they get tons of rain, and it can support that big kind of leaf. We can't support that here. So our biggest, deciduous tree is a big leaf maple. And then we have lots of small ones, lots of small things, but they're not big, those big major trees, the things that we plant in our landscapes, those are all from other places. They are not native here. So this sort of just sets up a picture of like what we're dealing with, where the highs and lows are, where you're going to get a bunch of rain potentially, where you might need to even be thinking about protecting plants in the wintertime, from what? From cold, from too much moisture in the soil, all those kinds of things. And this can have a lot of impact on your vegetable garden and how you treat it over the course of the year, especially if you are not growing things over the winter. You need to protect your soil. Okay. So one way to do that is by using this tool to help you sort of guide what's going on minute by minute. You can be looking at it. I'm not sure how often they update this. Oh, it says 15 minutes. So, okay, so 15 minutes, they're updating what's going on um, in the weather in that wherever that weather station is. And this is the Puyallup extension. It's right across the road from the extension site down in Puyallup. This is showing, I think I pulled this in, I don't have the date on there. I think it was sometime earlier this year. And so it's showing you uh, yeah, actually, it's kind of hard to read. Elizabeth, can you see what the number is on that soil reading on the little map?
Yeah, let's take a look here.
It's kind of blurred. 34, I think it says. Yeah, so this was pulled in like January, I think. That's how cold the soil was at 8 inches deep. That's pretty darn cold, right? You're not going to be planting tomatoes in soil that cold. And it's January. No, we don't plant them then. If you're in Louisiana, you are planting them then because they have warmer soils and it gets too hot in the summertime. So, relative differences depending on where you live. So yeah, 34 degrees soil temperature. You can look at the station closest to wherever you live. You can use this little drop down menu and find soil temperature at 2 inches, soil at 8. You can find out what the air temperature is. Those are the two most important things for you to know about as you're planning and thinking, is it time to plant tomatoes? So part of those discussions online with all the Facebook groups, I keep posting this link, go to AgWeatherNet, go see what's going on. Then you'll be armed with information to know whether it's really right or wrong to be putting tomatoes out yet. You want your soil to be warmer when you put tomatoes out. This should be at least by about 60 degrees and if for sure above 50. So if you put them out cooler than that, they just sit there. Sometimes they get stunted. Their roots don't grow well and they don't rebound from that. Okay. So we're going to go through a little bit of seasonality, even though this talks about all seasons of the year. We have spring in the Northwest, it's like March through May, and then we have summer, which is June through mid-September. Then we have this sort of fall weather, mid-September to mid-November. And then winter actually starts really November and goes all the way through February. So we have a long winter period, really. And for us, winter isn't necessarily all about snow and freezing temperatures. It can be. It's mostly about those sort of overcast days, not much light coming through, short days where we don't get much light. So the light factor is huge here, right? It's a big deal. And then it also we get lots of rain. So we have precipitation, which could come mostly in rain, sometimes in snow. And then we have the darkness factor that's affecting how our plants grow. So that has an impact on what you grow when, especially if you're trying to grow overwintering crops. So this little chart that Territorial has is pretty good for telling you when you can sow seeds. One thing I want to point out is that if you are going to put hot crops out, but you want to start something like a pepper or tomato from seed, you need to have already done that because it's too late now. Our soil now, I didn't check today, but the other day it was still like 54 or something at 8 inches in the north. I use the one at the Center for Urban Horticulture for Seattle. And that's not warm enough to really germinate tomatoes very well. They would sit there for a long time. Even if it came up, it's going to be tiny. And the soil's not warm enough for it to really grow robustly. It's also too late, just in general, because they need a long period of time to develop a big enough plant to flower and fruit so that you'll produce something. If you were to plant a tomato seed in the soil when it's warm enough in the Northwest, you're not going to get any fruit because it would need to be November. And they're gone by then. They get hit by frost, they get hit by the rain, they start to get blight on them, all kinds of things happen. So being aware of all that and how it works here helps. But you can see on this chart, there's a ton of stuff that can be grown For long, long seasons, right? You can be growing like parsley for a really long time. It's really tolerant of a lot of weather. It can winter over. It's a biennial. Sometimes it blooms in the second year, and sometimes you'll get, a full 2 years out of it before that happens. You can do some things that you sow in the middle of summer. So coming up, these are things you should be thinking about now. Do I want to be planting something else later on? A lot of times we think by May, June, when we've gotten our garden in, we've done the spring stuff, now we're doing the hot weather stuff, we think we're done. But you can keep going here because there are short season crops that will ripen in the fall. And then there's crops that will be longer but can winter over. Those are a lot of your brassicas, cauliflower, cabbage, broccoli, bok choy. We grow lots of those here. They're really well suited for the Northwest because of our weather. And they're pretty heat tolerant as well. So you can grow a ton of things like that. You can also winter over leeks and onions, things like that. So this territorial chart can sort of help you. It also has some great information about how to store your seeds, which is super important to think about. You can also be thinking about, in the winter time, what else can you be doing? You can be planting cover crops. You can be, getting your soil protected from the rain. So there are things to do even in what we think of as the off season. Oops. All right, so basic considerations for a veggie garden. You need to put it where it gets at least 6 hours of sun. Doesn't have to be concurrent. You could get an hour and a half and then there's a little bit of shade and then you get more. My backyard kind of goes through 3 sun changes, I would say. It's like morning sun and then a little bit of mid-morning and then midday to late to mid-afternoon. And then parts of it get that late afternoon sun, and then there's a big section of it that just gets shady again. So I have I have to move around if I want to sit in the shade, or if I want to get in the sun. I have to be in different spots in my yard if I'm out there at different times. So be aware of how the sun moves. It's going to be different in the winter than it is in the summer. But if we're trying to grow things in the summertime, like tomatoes and peppers, we need to have some decent light on them. And heat helps, but it's not 100%. I've actually seen that my peppers don't like it as hot in really hot spots like my tomatoes did. But even tomatoes will stop producing when it gets too hot. So they will actually have blossom drop that happens. We had, oh, when was that? A couple years ago. Was it in it's not the thing, not the heat dome that happened in June, or it could have been. Yeah, actually it was the heat dome that happened in June, and some people's tomatoes were flowering and those flowers fell off the plants, and then there was this gap and then they started blooming again when it cooled down. So that's a really good thing to think about in terms of choosing what type of tomato, because if you have a determinate tomato, that means it's going to grow to a certain size like a bush, put all its flowers on, and then fruit, and you're done. They're great for canning because you can like collect everything and you're done with your job. But if you want tomatoes all summer long, you get an indeterminate plant which grows like a vine, and those are the ones we need to stake and do all this stuff with and manage. But they're going to keep growing and putting new flowers on. So those are the ones that were able to bounce back out of that. I have friends who had determinate crops and they didn't get anything because all the flowers fell off and then, they were just in bloom. So it's very sad, but that can happen. We can have those things happen. And we'll talk at the very end of this about some mitigation for things like that. You need to make sure that you have good soil. You need to make sure that you can water well. You need to have the right tools, especially if, I have a bad back. I have an old back injury. So I garden in raised things or I have big containers. I don't do as much things in the ground. Most of my perennial things go into the ground, so I don't have to mess with them very often. And then I have, make sure I have the right tools for me so I'm not hurting my back. So if you have wrist issues, there are ergonomic tools you can use that won't irritate your wrists. People that get carpal tunnel syndrome, that kind of thing. So there's lots of things you can do to help yourself there. And then you want to choose the right crops. We'll talk about that. And then we want to practice integrated pest management, or IPM. And we're going to really uh, spend a few minutes on that for sure. All right, so here's just an example of types of garden beds. The beds in the bottom picture are some beds I built at the Picardo Farm Pea Patch many years ago for the food bait garden. We put 22 of these in. They're 4 foot by 8 foot. They were about 18 inches tall. They're not quite as tall because they're a little bit sunk into the ground, but this is all juniper. We got this all from Dunn Lumber, and it's juniper wood that is harvested from forests in Oregon, where it's a weed tree. So it's a sustainable harvest in that sense. It's not wrecking any trees. It's actually getting rid of a problem tree. Super good wood for building things like this because it has natural preservatives in it, like cedar does. Actually true to dimensions. So an 8-inch board, an 8-inch by 1 inch or 2 inch, I can't remember what these were, is truly that. And you can, helps you with your measurements, gets you a full 8 by 4 foot bed. So these are really easy to do. We had let's see, so 6 8 foot planks plus 3 more that we cut in half and made that end from. And then we got these other pieces that we cut then to work as supports around the edges. Filled them with a good mix in these initially, and things went crazy in there. So raised beds can actually help because they bring solar radiation into the soil more easily than if something's in the ground, because the sun can only access one dimension of the ground, but it can access all sides of the soil here. So, several sides, and it will warm it up better. You don't have to have a raised bed, a side on a raised bed. You can raise a mound of soil, and that'll actually have the same effect. In the ground, though, you can maximize space by having plants that sprawl. So it's hard, to fill up a whole bed like this with pumpkin because it's going to just take over the whole thing. But if you have room in the ground where you can redirect where your plants are going, you can and make spaces like that. If you're trying to change an area of your garden, you want to get rid is just by placing straw bales on that area to get it ready. And you grow in those straw bales this year, and you put soil in them, and you add some nitrogen fertilizer, like a good natural nitrogen base. It could be alfalfa meal, something that is just nitrogen. You put in the bales with the soil, and that partially helps to break down the bale, but it's also heating up in that straw because you've got the carbon and the nitrogen that you've mixed together, which is how compost works. So you're heating it, and then you have the soil as a medium for your plants to grow in. You can have all these wonderful plants growing there for the year. As it decays and breaks apart, you just spread it out and mulch the area. And by the next season, you have this everything. If you had lawn underneath, it's all dead. You've got a garden. You were able to be productive this year. You didn't have to break your back, tearing all that lawn out. So it's a really and that works, but you can't grow directly into it like you can with a straw bale garden. So that's super fun. You do want to find straw that's not contaminated with herbicides, which sometimes it can be. So ask your sources if they know. A lot of times crops are burnt down with pesticides, with herbicides to kill what's left over. And sometimes also things are sprayed with, they are genetically modified crops that are be able to be sprayed with something like Roundup, because that can kill the weeds around it, but doesn't kill the plant. Sun in March is in one place, and then it gets shady. You can move them somewhere else where it's going to get some sun later on. So you can actually sort of maximize that. A lot of people love square foot gardens. I've never done it myself. I'm more of a habitat gardener, so I like sort of place groupings of plants together. I don't do necessarily things in straight lines too often. And square foot gardens um, don't work for me that way because of the way I'm very organized, and you can figure out what can grow in a square foot, and you plant that much taller appropriately. This works really well though for things like root crops and greens, and things that stay sort of closer to the ground. You can maximize an 4 by 8 foot bed like these you see in this bottom picture. You can maximize the heck out of that. So you can see that happening in this top picture up above, where there's lots of greens and there's onions and things. They don't have too many things in there, like and some brassicas that they put in the back. So those are going to be taller. You can create all kinds of really cool gardens, and you can do patterns out of this. You can make them really artistic. Say you did want to do all this with just greens, you could have this beautiful palette of, red lettuces, green lettuces, and then some arugula, and all these different cool textures and colors. You don't have to, just be utilitarian in your gardening. I try to make mine have some aesthetics to it, which is why I don't like to just plant in rows. I'm not a production gardener. I am um, a beauty gardener, I guess I would say, but I do want my food to produce too for what I'm growing. And then there's pallets like up above. And this is a big herb garden built with used pallets that have been stacked together and have soil filled in between. And then you just plant in those crevices. And those plants will help hold all that soil in place. You have to have a good system of watering. Drip irrigation can work really well for something like this. It's a way to reuse materials and also have this sort of green wall and use a vertical space. We forget about vertical areas, which are really useful because we only are looking at the ground. We're like, I don't have enough room. But then if you build things up, then you can put even more things in there because some things are growing up and some things are just occupying that low space. So as you're thinking about what to build them out of, there's so many different things. There's different aesthetics, different ways. You can see this middle picture is another one of those juniper beds. This was a project my team worked on some years ago now with the Dirt Alert program out of Federal Way. And actually these guys were in Des Moines, but we were down in Federal Way, Des Moines, Burien area doing this work because Dirt Alert is a program that actually is relative to the Sarco smelter that used to pump a lot of heavy metals, toxins into the air, and it has polluted ground in those areas in Southwest King County. And so our job was to teach people about the hazards of that and preventing, exposure, but also how can you garden in these areas? So this is one way, is to build a raised bed. And this was a preschool that we worked with. It was a bilingual preschool in the Des Moines area. They had a little raised bed kind of behind where I was standing taking this picture. But this is a bed we custom built for them and filled up. And then all the little kids came out and planted all those plants you see sitting there. And they had a fabulous garden. They still have this bed. They let us put a big sign on the fence on the outside, telling people what Dirt Alert was and how to do this stuff. And so this is a super cool project, really fun to do. But that went in, a few hours one day, with a group of about 4 of us. And the gentleman, one of the co-owners of the preschool, helped with it as well. So we had a fun time. You could do something way more formal and decorative, like these stacked rock type walls, but these are manufactured. You can buy all kinds of really cool manufactured stone that can make these great curves like this. So you can build, circular things, you can build curvy beds and fill them up. If you get up above 3 feet, you need to worry about some backfill, but engineering of that, it's not that hard to do. You just have to be aware because you need to be able to stabilize the wall. But you can do these, to a couple feet for sure. That's going to give you a lot of latitude. One of the best things about these is you can sit on them. You can sit there. If you have a bad back like me, I can sit down and I can sort of just sit sideways and work on that bed a little bit. And then I would, for me, build a skinnier so that I didn't have to like climb up in there and do anything to it. But you can have all kinds of really cool settings like this using this kind of material. And then there's a lot of new sheet steel products that are out there. I've seen a lot of ads for things. Some of them are modular. You can build them round, you can build them square. They don't often have bottoms on them, so you put them somewhere where it doesn't need to be, you know, have anything underneath it. And then, you know, one of the benefits of that, the downside of that is if you're in the area where the Sarco smelter happened, you don't want that to happen. So you would want some sort of bottom on them. But this is an example of some work the Seattle Urban Farm Company does. They just do tremendous work. They do rooftop gardens for people. They build the most beautiful gardens. You see a drip irrigation system in the one in the front. That's the little shorter one that looks like an herb garden. But, you know, look how robust everything is in there. It's really growing well. These are pretty high. You know, that's a pretty good sized raised bed. That would be a good one for me. I don't have to bend over in that very much at all. You can use any kind of wood as long as it's non-treated. But like I said, that cedar and juniper is the longest lasting. All right, so what I always recommend if you're picking crops, grow what you know you will eat. I had there was a couple that I knew at Picardo Pea Patch who one of them was the gardener and the other one was the one who, and the cook person picked what to grow because the other person really didn't care about any of that. She just liked to grow plants. And so it was hilarious because they were like, oh, I don't know what I do with this. You know, my partner takes care of that. But they had a good, they hatched up that way because one of them was willing to do all the work and the other one was willing to do all the cooking. And they had this, like at that time at Picardo, you could have really huge garden spaces because it's so big. They've kind of whittled that down so people don't have as much space anymore, but they still can have like 1,000 square feet gardens up there. So those are pretty big for in-city pea patches. But you want to grow what you know you're going to harvest. Or if you want to grow things that you just think are fun to grow, give it to the food bank so you can give it away too. There's lots of avenues for that. Also think about what is it that's more expensive to buy? You know, is asparagus costs a lot? You know, it also, you know, is super tasty coming fresh out of the garden. But you know, specialty peppers, heirloom tomatoes, you know, those things can cost quite a bit. If you find that they're more difficult for you to grow, then you actually don't want to do that because you won't be successful at it. But it's also just sort of keeping that in mind. Can I grow this thing? You know, if I'm going to the market to buy this all the time, can I actually grow those, you know, chocolate cherry tomatoes and just have them? There are certain things that grow really well. Cherry tomatoes are easy, so you can do that. And then grow when you actually know you can have time to garden. And one reason I say this is I'm a gardener. People always say, oh, you must have a beautiful yard. I work all the time. I work on weekends like today. I'm working tomorrow at the plant sale. It's May. I've planted a few things, but I still have some things sitting in pots that need to go in the ground. So I have really sort of whittled down to what I know, where my windows are going to be, where I can actually get things in the ground so that they can start growing and take care of themselves a little bit. But then I have to be aware if it's going to get hot, I have to water. Am I going to have time in that season to really worry about that? Or am I going to skip that season this year and just go on to the next? Because realistically, you have to take care of things and you have to think about those things. I like to look for more unusual things. I also, for myself, I was at the sale last night. The early bird sale opened last night, which is a fundraiser for Tilt. And so I get, as a staff person, get to buy my plants then. And I picked out some of the more unusual peppers, but I also picked out a few things that were brand new to us to see how they do. So I do a little trial testing sometimes to see, is that a good crop or not? Should I sell it again? That kind of thing. But it's fun to find those more unusual things. You do want to be aware that it's something that can actually produce in this area. So you could find a really unusual pepper that's going to take, 99 days, and maybe that's not the best choice. You might want to find one that takes 70 days because it's going to be more realistic for the Northwest.
Hey, Laura.
So we're just going to back up. Yeah, yeah.
We have a question. What
Okay.
you were kind of answering it, but what are your favorite things to grow?
Oh, my favorite things to grow. I like to grow a lot of herbs. So I have a lot of, as I said, I don't put very many things in the ground. Most of my ground plants are either tree shrubs or perennial flowers for the most part. Some herbs. There are some herbs in the ground, but I do a lot of herbs in pots as well. So I always have to grow tomatoes. And last night I was picking out tomatoes and I'm like, I should only get a few because I started 3 varieties at my house, 3. Plus, I think I ended up buying maybe 5 more. So now I have at least 8 varieties. That's an improvement. I've had 22 different types of tomatoes at times. I don't need that many tomatoes. Again, that's a real reality check. I don't have time to take care of that many tomatoes. But I love to grow tomatoes. I'm fascinated by them. They're weeds. They're like weedy little plants. People are mystified by them, but they actually come from sort of desert climates where they just sprawl all over the ground. The vining plants are actually sprawling plants, right? We grow them up, you know, for ease of picking and for health of the plant, but they grow like crazy if they're happy. I also really like to grow cucumbers. I love to grow cucumbers. I grow lots of onions because onions are very easy and they're very satisfying because you can, I need a couple green onions. I just go out there and they don't take up hardly any space. So lots of green onions for me. And I also grow lettuces, lots of lettuces, because I like having fresh lettuce. So I put it in at different times, and we're going to talk we can talk about it. It's succession planting, really. So I put in lettuce in March already, and now I have new plants that I've put in about a week or so ago, and now I have more new plants that I bought last night. So I won't have my lettuce be ripe, all at the same time, ready to pick. I can't eat that much lettuce at once, so I like to stagger it over the season, but I love fresh lettuce. And then there was one other thing. What was I thinking about? I do like to grow hot peppers. They're easy and they're beautiful. Um, oh my gosh. I'm trying to think of what I have out there right now. Oh, basil. That was the other thing I was thinking. Always basil because I make pesto every fall. So I always have to have basil. So those are my top crops for me. And then other than that, it's like I have lots of scented perennial flowers and like peonies and carnations and herbs. And especially letting herbs bloom that bring in all the pollinators. That's what my garden looks like. Although I can't show it to you right now because like I say, it needs a little attention. But these are all things, looking at this chart, you can do a lot of things early in the season. You can get a lot of even tender, what we think of as tender perennials. Cilantro is cool tolerant. So people think of it as a hot weather crop. It's not. It doesn't like to be planted in midsummer. You can put plants in if you've started them, but seeding the cilantro is harder in the summer because the soil dries out too fast for it. But you can think about, continuing to reseed things, looking at those charts of, what vegetables like which temperature that are available, looking at the weather station data to see what's actually happening. But being aware that, you can seed things directly in the ground or you can be starting your indoor crops. So these are an example of some tomatoes that we had seeded. All of these, we were working with groups of interns who we said, put like 6 seeds in one pot, and they put them all in one little place. What we really meant and should have said is put 6 seeds in, but spread them out through the pot so they'll be easier to divide when we went to transplant them. And but as an example of, you can have one 4-inch pot and start yourself 6 tomatoes, and then you just need at some point to be able to separate those to get them growing a little bit bigger. These were Romas, so they were still doing pretty well. We do a lot of, we have another program that's works with culturally relevant plants, which we give away to immigrant refugee groups, community gardens that do food bank beds, different groups and partners that we work with through the hotline, but the program is outside the hotline. And we do all kinds of really interesting things. Like we do some okra for people and hibiscus, and we do this garden huckleberry is actually an edible plant that's related to tomato and peppers. Typically you don't eat tomato leaves, you don't eat pepper leaves, but these actually have edible leaves, but they are related and they look very similar. So we have a lot of really interesting things, but all these things need hotter weather. That hibiscus is actually a perennial tropical hibiscus, but you can grow it as a green. You cut the stem, you can eat the stem and the leaf. You can let it bloom and collect the calyx. The red calyx is a little tiny white flower with red calyx on the bottom of it, and you collect that, and that's what makes that dried hibiscus that you use for hibiscus tea. So you can use it for that. Super fun, super pretty plant to grow. But now, this is where we are right now. There's the hibiscus. There it is. Isn't that pretty? So it's got these beautiful red stems and the very typical hibiscus leaf. And what you're harvesting is, those leaves. You can just pick leaves off of it if you want. If you can get it growing big enough, you can cut the whole stem, or you can just let it flower. Eventually, it'll have flowers kind of scattered all over the outside of it. Now is when we're starting to transplant things that we've planted. Definitely these hot weather things you see in this first list. Whoops, I didn't mean to click. Solanaceae is referring to tomatillo, tomato, pepper, eggplant, those kinds of things. Basil, okra, dill, hibiscus, marigold, nasturtium. There are differences in all of these. Nasturtium would be okay out right now. Probably the dill, marigold. It's still chilly. We're still getting a little chilly weather. So hibiscus, basil, okra, and all the solanaceae, I wouldn't put them out yet. I might try some of my tomatoes with wall of water protection around them, and I'm going to show you a little bit about that. I'm going to wait to do things like these beans and cucumbers right into the ground because I want the soil to be a little bit warmer. I've got lots of marigolds out and I've had them out for a few weeks and they're fine. And I would also wait for things like these winter melons, chayote, bitter melon, until it's warmer. You can get them started inside anyway. Chayote, you actually have to start from the fruit itself. You have to let the seed sort of like sprout from the fruit. 60-degree soil is what's ideal for getting them in the ground. And then for these things like the squash and the beans, you can plant those from seed directly, but you need the soil also to be warm. So here's just sort of looking at cool season versus warm season. And one of the things I want to point out here is the big difference here is one side is super leafy, kind of like, we have a root crop and we have all these leafy things. And the ones on the right all have fruit. So that's part of the difference of what you're seeing. Most things that fruit need warmer seasons. Planting times. And then in warmth, then they need pollinators to be present. So they need sunshine and warmth. So this is kind of a visual representation of how different they are and why we cater to them differently. And all the things you see here are things that grow quite well in the Northwest, super well. For showed seeing packets and the stuff, but super tons of information on here. There's this Snack Hero hanging basket snap peas. that have, they're really little. You can put them in a hanging basket on your front porch. They don't take much space. But it has this is Renee's garden seed, and it has this whole bit of info about how to do it and how to start them and how to harvest them. And then on the edge of it, if you flip this little piece back, it actually tells you when to plant. So it shows you a range of seasons. So it's showing you can do these again in the summer for a fall harvest. So you can plant July and August. I've actually also planted in October for especially snow peas do this well, and then they winter over. So I get them in the ground in October, they grow a little bit, and then they winter over, and then by the spring they start growing. That has been a successful technique for me because I'm really busy in March, and so often I miss that March window. And at March to May I'm like busy, busy, busy. And then I am not interested in July, August. It's a little hotter and I'd have to water them more often. So that October window works pretty well for me. They need full sun, plant them at an inch deep, put them 3 inches apart. It's going to take 7 to 10 days to see them sprout. This is really good information because if you waited 2 days and you're going, where are they? It's not time yet. So give yourself a little patience. Know that carrots might say 14 days. Some things say 21 days. So literally it can take 3 weeks to see a seed germinate, depending on what it is. And then this is how long it takes to when you can start picking, when things will produce. So peas are fast. They like cool weather. You can grow a lot of them. You can do succession sowing in this March to May window. You could put, a crop in every 2 weeks if you love peas, and you're going to have them coming and coming and coming for a while. Also here on the other, this little flap that comes over, it just gives you a little bit more info about the variety they actually have in the seed packet. So Renee's does a lovely job of giving you information. Now, one of the reasons why growing from seed is important, and even if you're just starting plants indoors to plant out later, is you're going to have way more choices of varieties. You're going to have way more choices of types of lettuce than you're going to find even at a good nursery or even at our plant sale, right? I bring in a lot of different kinds of lettuce, but I can't bring in everything. The whole sale floor would be full of lettuce, and people want to buy their tomatoes right now. So we sell a lot of lettuce in our March sale, which we do early because it can go out then. And but there's so many different varieties you can pick and choose. If you like, the butterhead types, you can just go find what you really want or want to try. And then you can, once you find something you like, if it's an open pollinated plant, you can save that seed. So open pollinated just means it's not a hybrid. It's not created from two different parents and manipulated to bred them to get to different traits. And they try different generations, and then they find one that works, and then they start saving that seed. But the thing about that is it's hard to do that yourself, first of all. Second, you're not going to guarantee that you're going to get the same thing you grew if it's a hybrid. You're going to get one of the parents or some weird thing. Also, if you have multiple types of lettuce in there too close together, potentially could cross-pollinate. Some things are less likely than others, but you want to be aware that things can also cross-pollinate. But you can save your own seed. You can also share seeds. During the COVID, the initial time of people having to stay home, my sister lives in Philadelphia and she loves basil too. And so she bought a whole bunch of basil seed, and what she could find at the time. Some seed companies were in short supply because people were buying them out. She found about, I think it was 4 ounces of basil seed. And if you know what a basil seed looks like, it's tiny, one seed, one plant. She sent the rest of it to me, and I ended up sharing it out to other people through my work because it was just this huge bag of basil seed. And I always buy my plants. I hardly ever start them, but she didn't need any, hardly any of that. So, you can actually buy things in bulk and share them on purpose. Super fun. There's a lot of seed libraries now, especially at some of the libraries. So there's one in the Woodmont Library in Des Moines. There's one up in the Shoreline Library, I think now, and then there's also one in the High Point Library here in Seattle that I know of, those three. And then there's other locations that have them. Tilth has just taken on the oversight of the King County Seed Lending Library. So it's sort of becoming one of our programs. But all the people who have their own seed libraries are just sort of part of this collective. We're sort of building a collective of people and they manage their own stuff. We're just going to be the host for the website and, for support and for finding help for things and bringing sort of information together. So check that out. Look at that website, King County Seed Lending Library. It will soon migrate to the Tilth website, but there's a ton of information there and where all the seed library folks are. It's also just really fun to see your seeds sprout. Like, I love it. I will grow microgreens just for that reason, and then I'll eat them, of course, but I just love to see all those little seedlings grow. So seeds are really fun. But, when we're trying to grow plants, the first main thing is soil needs to be healthy. So it's the key to plant health. And you see this sort of little, chart of elements here. These are all the things that we are concerned about being in our soil to keep our plants healthy. You see three ingredients here, or three symbols here: nitrogen for N for nitrogen, phosphorus, P, and then K for potassium. Those three are fertilizer boxes, right? Those are the three numbers that you see. These are three major plant nutrients that we're trying to feed our plants. Nitrogen will help your plants stay green, promotes leafy growth. It actually is what helps build the chlorophyll cell while your plants are green. That all is because of the nitrogen. Phosphorus is good for bloom and fruit, and potassium is good for cell strength and structure and root structure. And so all three of these work together, but all these other things like magnesium and zinc and calcium and, iron and manganese, sulfur, all of these matter, and boron, they're all in the soil. And they are super important for different reasons. So soil is really mineral content, organic matter, air, water, and microorganisms. So soil, we think of, oh, it's dirt. We think mostly of like, oh, it's rock. It's what, I don't know. It can't be soil if it doesn't have microorganisms too. It's not functional. And so we are building healthy soil by building a habitat that will help to host all those microorganisms. And part of that is how much organic matter is in there. We don't want too much. It ties up nutrients. It also is your microorganisms are going to be like too busy. So 3 to 6% is ideal. I just did 2 soil tests with 2 gardens that we're working with. One is at Seymour Clinic down in Burien. This old bed they had that they hadn't worked very much in the last year or so. And we did one at a housing site in sort of the Judkins Park area in Seattle. Both of them came back super high in organic matter. One of them was like 14%. I forget what the other one was. So that's too much. And what that means is that whatever soil mix they got was really high in organic matter, or maybe they put too much compost into it. Maybe they bought soil and then they added compost. When you buy soil ahead of time, purchase soil, it's variable, but it usually is made of compost. It's not soil in the same sense that soil in the ground is. That takes thousands of years or at least 500 years to develop really fully over time. So we're not making soil for real. We are creating plant growing medium which replicates soil and try to get mineral content and organic matter and air and water. We put in things that will make sure that water can stay in it and that air can move through it. And then sometimes some soil mixes, they insert different microorganisms and sort of, kind of cultivate it. they add them to the mix. But we are trying to feed the organisms in the soil. That is how we feed our plants. It's their interaction with the things in the soil and then with plants that actually helps bring the nutrients to the plants. So when we talk about feeding soil, we're actually feeding organisms that live in our soil. We've created this habitat for them. We're trying to keep them happy. So we're not only tending our plants, we're tending all the critters in the soil, which will help to tend our plants. If you're going to do things in containers, you should use potting soil, not like some three-way mix or other things. You need something that has usually perlite in it, which is volcanic rock, which has holes in it, and that helps to keep it lighter. The mix gets lighter. There's not as much compaction, and then it also lets water through it very easily. So these are some of the ways that we improve our soil. We add compost to the soil. Whoop, oh my goodness. We add compost to the soil. We add mulch to the top of the soil, which has lots of properties we'll talk about in a second. And that actually will decompose over time and add nutrients. We can grow cover crops in it. We use natural organic fertilizers, as I mentioned, something like alfalfa meal. You're looking for fertilizers that have natural names on them, things you recognize. It could be bone meal, it could be, bat guano, but they're not chemical names. Chemical products can destroy soil life. It's harsh on the things that live in your soil. And then again, you can sheet mulch to jumpstart a garden space. So part of what they're doing here, they have those big boxes of cardboard here in this picture behind them, and they're gonna put compost down, then they're gonna put that cardboard over it, and then they're gonna mulch over that, and that's gonna help to promote a good deep bed underneath there. You can do that to kill weeds, kill grass, things like that. All right, so when you are taking care of your plants in the summer, you need to think about watering. You want to water deeply rather than frequently and shallowly. You want to water early in the morning if you can. I say that knowing that I hardly ever do that because I'm trying to get out the door if I'm leaving, or I'm at the computer because I got to start something, or there's a meeting. And we're busy people. So if you have to water in the evening, avoid getting the leaves wet if you can. Keep it down at the soil level. That's more important. If you have leaves that go through the nighttime wet, especially as it's warmer in the summer, it builds sort of a lot of humidity, and it also creates fungal colonies. It makes it ripe for fungus. So really, any gardening we do, we're creating habitat. We can be creating habitat for problems like fungus issues on a plant by doing the wrong thing, like, keeping a plant wet all night, having it be too humid at night. That's a really good reason why something like powdery mildew happens, is because there's high humidity, especially at night. It's not as much the moisture on the leaf. Actually, it's the anomaly in the disease world. Putting moisture on leaf of a plant that has powdery mildew actually suppresses it because it doesn't allow the spores to fly around. So you can suppress it that way, but you would want to do it early in the day. So in that case, it's not going to be terrible. Like if you get powdery mildew, on, broccoli, water the leaves in the morning as you're watering your plants, and don't worry about it. They're going to dry off. They're kind of waxy. It's not going to hurt them that much. Something like squash, you can use other kinds of receptacles that you bury in the ground near the roots, and you just pour the water in there. And it can be something as simple as like a big, milk jug, that you cut the bottom out of, or you just turn it upside down and cut a hole in the bottom to put a hose in, something that's going to hold water and then let it out really slowly underground at the root zone so that the top of the soil doesn't get wet. We can't control the rain, but remember that dry period is happening right before powdery mildew starts happening. If we can create conditions that will keep it at bay, you may be able to get through the summer without much problem, because it'll happen late in the season as it starts to rain again, because we can't control that. But you can actually do a lot to prevent it for a while. Oyas or olas are actual terracotta containers that are buried in the ground and used in the same way. And then because they're porous, the water just sort of soaks back out into the ground. So because of the process of osmosis, the water just sort of moves through them and then leaks out at the root level. So those are kind of fun. You can get really cool ones. You can make them yourself out of two terracotta pots you stack together and put a little rim of glue, super tight glue together on. And then you just close up the bottom of the one you're burying, and then you leave part of the other one above ground, and you use that drainage hole to put your water in. You can also mulch. Super important to mulch because mulch will help keep moisture in the ground. And then make sure you're choosing the right tool. So you see this little drip irrigation. It's going to let a little drip of water out right at that plant. If you're doing drip, you need to do it right, because if all I'm doing is one little drip on that side of the plant, and I don't have any close enough to the other side to hit the roots on the other side, it may not soak in deep enough. You have to leave it on longer in order to really saturate the ground. Again, the water will move through the soil to where it's dry and hit those plant roots. But drip irrigation can save you a ton of water, and it's really good because it reduces all that humidity issue. Water isn't like being evaporated and wasted, also from the wind as you're spraying things. If you use like a hose end wand, it should have a shutoff valve on it. And like this is one of those that has settings. You can change them. You can see the water's only coming out of one point on that nozzle. And you can change it to be a straight jet. You can change it to be a gentle shower. You can change it to be a wider pattern. And you can use that based on whatever you're watering. I do a lot of hand watering, and I like a water wand because it has extension on it, and I use them with the shutoff and with the variable heads because it gives me time to look at my plants. So hand watering for me is helpful because I can stop and look at things and check and see, do I have good bugs? Do I have bad bugs? Do I have issues starting? What's going on here? It gives me a lot of time. But there's lots of ways. Some people like to just use water buckets. The nice thing I usually have one of those outside too, front and back, because I use those to put fertilizers into, like fish fertilizer, liquid fertilizers, or kelp fertilizers, which can help with stressed plants. And then I can just put it in there and water my plant, and I fertilized, I'm done. So I use a lot of different things, but use the right thing for what's going to work for you. All right, so mulching, super important. It's organic matter applied to the surface of the soil. It's usually a few inches deep. In a veggie garden, ideally you want to be using things that are compatible with that. So like leaves, compost, straw. And again, that straw, it's a really great mulch, but be aware that you need to be asking. Compost works super well, but it doesn't keep weeds down as well. So just be aware of that. Mulch keeps soil temperature modified. It keeps moisture in the soil, and it nourishes and provides habitat for soil organisms. So all of that is super important. It'll also protect your soil in the winter if you have mulch down from compaction from rain and from loss of nutrient in your soil. Our soils become acidic because of the calcium loss from the rain. Calcium is very mobile, and it will move into layers lower than our root zone, and then it's not available to plants. This is what makes our acid soils. This is why conifers grow here, because the soils are acid. They're not making them acid. They're here because they are acid, because of that lack of calcium. You can do something very simple, and I used to do this all the time in my pea patch at Picardo. I had a big, long raised bed, and those food bank beds too. So as weeds are growing in there, as long as they don't have disease, insect, or seeds on them, you just pull them up, you chop them up, and you drop them in place, because they are just going to decompose and go back into the soil, but you're actually creating a living mulch, right? And well, it's not living, you're creating a green mulch, I should say, right there. And then if you are harvesting cauliflower and you have all these old leaves on the outside, you don't have a compost bin, you don't want to add them, you don't have a worm bin, you just chop them up and lay them on the soil, as long as they don't have any diseases on them, that kind of thing. Deep tap roots absorb a lot of nutrients. So if you have comfrey in your yard, pulling some leaves of comfrey actually will have a ton of cool nutrients in it that's really useful for vegetable gardens. So you can just cut some sometimes and chop them up and put them around your plants. So you just leave them around, the plants you're growing, chop them up into smaller pieces so they will decompose. They're going to dry out. So it's going to look like, other kinds of mulches you would have put down. And you can protect that. Things like dandelions, are super nutritious and also deep tap rooted. So they have a lot of nutrient in them as well. You don't want to be putting those flowers on there when they're full of seed heads because, of course, you're just spreading seeds. But they can be a very useful plant in many ways. And then you can grow cover crops. So typically we think about this for for winter, excuse me. And we're planting pea family plants and cereal grains in the fall to grow all the way through the winter, protects our soil, keeps it healthy, stops nutrients from leaching, keeps it from compacting, breaks up soil with their roots, adds habitat for organisms, flowers in the spring on the pea family, bringing pollinators, lots of really good benefits. But you can do this in the summer with other kinds of plants that we grow anyway and don't think about in that way. Things like sweet alyssum that you see in this picture. So this lovely sweet alyssum, which is one of my favorite flowers actually, and smells heavenly. It grows really wide. It's actually edible. It's in the brassica family, like broccoli. So it's a similar plant. You can plant a ton of that all around the base of your chard like this. So these guys have got chard in here as an ornamental in their border of flowers, but you can mix it up like that. And that's a great way to bring pollinators in also for your fruiting plants, but also just provide this living mulch that's going to keep that soil cool, which chard will appreciate at the base. It's not going to grow up big. It's not going to compete with it. Buckwheat and phacelia are kind of classic summer cover crops that people sow on purpose. So if you have a bed you don't want to do something with, or it needs improving, put some compost, a little extra compost, and you put this stuff in and you just let it grow for the summer. It's going to feed the bees and it's going to look pretty, and then it's going to protect your soil. So just remember that you don't have to grow a full crop. That can be your crop. Other things that we grow a lot of and that are really easy, nasturtium, calendula, borage, all of these guys can be really useful sort of living mulches in beds. And then if you have like an orchard area, white clover is fabulous living mulch. You can transition areas that you had lawn that you want to not have lawn into white clover lawns. They fix nitrogen in the soil. They have flowers that feed the bees. They're perennial. They stay green. They don't need much watering. They don't need any mowing. We have in our children's garden at Tilt Alliance at the Shepherd Center in Wallingford, we've converted this bed that has several, it's a garden area that has several beds that are used by the youth and families programs to grow annual plants for the kids all spring and summer and fall. And it used to be wood chipped all the time, and they spent forever weeding. And change this. Let's put new chips down. Let's keep it weeded for a year. Start seeding clover into it. Now it's mostly a clover lawn. They hardly ever have to mow it. The kids can run around on it. If you have bee allergies, you need to be aware of that. It may not be your best choice, but you can mow the flowers off at the very least. But super useful plant for stuff like that. All right, so we need to know about pests in the garden in the summer. Best way to really track what goes on in your garden is to have a journal. Like, pay attention to what's going on. We're going to be rotating crops as we grow things through a year and over a series of years. This is going to help prevent diseases and insect infestations, and it's going to also help manage nutrients in the soil. We want to attract beneficial insects, including pollinators. So some insects will actually eat other insects, and some of them basically just pollinate our fruiting plants. We want to use some companion planting techniques to maximize the health, but also because you're going to maximize the space of your garden. And then you want to use preventative practices to make sure that you are avoiding problems that can be avoided, that you don't have to worry about. Journaling will help you with that. Paying attention, like when I'm watering, I'm looking, using tools like floating row cover, shade cloth, mulches, all of those things, being aware of all the things you can do to stop things from even happening in the first place. So you don't ever have to worry about them. So crop rotation is very important in the Northwest for 3 families in particular. Well, 4 actually, if I include amaranth family. So tomato family, we get this disease called late blight, which is in that top left picture. Ruins your tomatoes, starts on the leaves, comes from the soil, splashing onto the leaves. Keeping that mulched will help prevent that. Not watering directly and letting its water splash around. If you have like some sort of thing buried that you can put in next to a tomato, I've used 1-gallon pots, which just sit up above the ground slightly. And I just let them, I bury them in the ground, and they have usually those 4 holes at the bottom, and those black 1 gallons. And then I just fill that pot up a few times and I put it around my tomatoes. That's going to water the roots. And then I don't get that soil splash happening. Again, you can't protect from rain, but you can mulch to help with that. Keep them open a bit so that there's less density on the plant. A lot of people prune their tomatoes up. They stake them up. They put them on. Once you get born, pea pastures is sort of this deadly thing. It just starts moving through a garden. Your tomatoes are all getting ripe, and then overnight they just turn mush like this. They turn black, and it's sort of this greasy, oily thing. You do not want that to happen in the Northwest. It can happen. So you need to prevent it from happening the best you can. You can grow varieties that are resistant to it as well. And there's lots of those these days. Right now, it's flying everywhere. I just saw one. I actually saw one about 2 weeks ago. Both cases, I was standing right next to broccoli plants. And the one 2 weeks ago, we were at the Des Moines Library. They have a raised bed, and we were doing a class, and I was talking about it. I had a little laminated poster that I was showing them these pictures and saying, this is the adult, this is the egg, this is the larva. So you see the larva is the one chewing. It's a caterpillar, right? It's a butterfly. It has a caterpillar. And then on the left of this picture on the bottom, this is a chrysalis of the butterfly. This is its pupa, and it's actually attached to the leaf. If you can interrupt the life cycle at any point, in particular this egg, you're not going to have that caterpillar. It's not going to chew the leaf. But we're standing there. I'm showing them this poster. We just planted some broccoli in their bed. And here she comes. She just comes flying in just as I brought up the poster. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there she is in real life. And then it happened, plant sale. We were putting broccoli out on the table, and here comes one. Like, they know. I don't know how they see this stuff. I'm not really sure, but they find them from wherever they are as soon as you set these plants out. They lay their eggs. They look like these little barrels, kind of. Sometimes they're in clusters. You want to look on the underside of the leaf. They're embedded a little bit into the tissue, but you can pull them off and you'll never have a problem. You can also pull this pupa off so it won't become an adult, so they don't keep perpetuating. They can have multiple generations start in April. They're already out, and they just keep going. They love things in the cabbage family. So anything in that family is susceptible. So pay attention to that. And then you can put floating row cover over these, and we'll look at a picture of that in a sec. But floating row cover lets air, light, and water through. You don't look at your plants most of the summer, but it doesn't allow that adult butterfly to lay her eggs ever. So it's a preventative technique, and you don't even have to worry about it. You do need to look for slugs underneath things like that because they love being under there. It's nice and moist and, cozy. But you can put slug traps down. You can use something like Sluggo. iron phosphate based slug material. The next picture is leaf miner, the next two pictures. So on the right, you see the arrow pointing to the eggs. Again, look on the underside of the leaf. They look like little tiny specks of rice, usually laid in rows or clusters. This is a fly, and she comes in. You use the same techniques you do with the cabbage butterfly, and you can pull these off, or you just pick that bad leaf off and get rid of it. We should start seeing these soon, if not already. Haven't been here. I haven't seen it myself, but it doesn't mean it's not out there. These guys, the larva tunnels through the leaves, through the two layers of the leaf, and they destroy tissue like this. This is chard or spinach or something. It looks like chard. Chard, spinach, beets, all greens I want to eat, especially my beet greens. Partially I grow beets for the beet, but I also grow them for the beet greens, one of my favorites. And they ruin it and you can't eat it. So you want to prevent that. Put the floating row cover on, inspect, and pay attention. Pull off what you see that's bad. Then you can have like basil root rot, like you see on these onions where the roots are starting to rot. So certain varieties are more resistant and some more susceptible. Be aware that that could be a problem. They can get rust on the leaves. There's not much you can do about that. So rust resistance is important. And then clubroot. This is very devastating for things also in the broccoli cabbage family. This is a disease that is in the soil. This little organism actually can live for 9 years easily with no host. And then you put the host in and it will just start working. It takes a while for it to build up proportions to where it makes this damage on the root. All of this is just deformed root because all of the tissue is all kind of being compromised and it clogs it up. And then it can't pull nutrients or water up into the plant. And the plant midday will look wilted even if the soil's wet. That's a good clue that you should be pulling one up to see the soil. We want to avoid this. It's prevalent in the Northwest. Higher pH soils are more resistant. Faster growing brassicas like radish, mustard, arugula, those things that grow really fast will be less susceptible because it takes so long for it to build up. But crop rotation matters here a lot. Do not plant. We plant this stuff all year long. We leave it all winter long. The next year, move it. Do not put the same thing back in there. And the problem is that it's a huge family of things that do super well in the Northwest, like I showed you on that chart. Kale, collards, kohlrabi, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, radish, mustard. I'm sure I'm for rutabaga. I'm sure I'm forgetting some things. That's like 11, 12 things right there. So all of those things grow really well. They grow all year long in the Northwest. So we tend to have an issue with this. It's a big problem in Canada for the canola farmers, which is a mustard family plant. And because, it ruins their crop and they, use canola for a million different things. So they are the ones doing the most research on it. And then, so in the amaranth family, we've got spinach, Swiss chard, and beets. Again, that's the leaf miner. You've got the alliums or onions and leeks and things like that. And then I listed all of the brassicas. And then in the Solanaceae family, it's primarily tomato and potato that seem to be affected by this the most. Tomatoes are for sure. You don't see it as much on things like peppers and eggplants, but it can happen to them, just to be aware of that. All right, so when you're planting companionably, the idea of this, people think of this as sort of like, how do I want to say it? Like non-scientific. It's sort of folksy, but it's actually is very scientific because what we're looking at here is different things happening in the root zone. Some of them grow vertical, some of them grow wide, some grow low. How do you combine them? How do you put things in so you can maximize your space? Also, How do you put them in so that they're helping each other? Pea family plants, like those pea cover crops, have nitrogen in their root systems through specialized nodules. They can help to feed other plants around them. You could plant peas in somewhere where you're going to put something that's, going to need a lot of nitrogen later, like broccoli. You can have a broccoli bed with peas growing up the back. Peas get done early in the summer. That broccoli is going to keep growing. Once you cut the peas down, all that nitrogen gets released into the soil from the roots, and you're feeding your plants. So you can combine things. You can do a combination like this picture on the left that has more shady, shade-loving things you could put in the base of it. And then you have a vine that grows over the top that needs the sun. Something like a cucumber would do well on a setting like this. And then you could have like a bed full of lettuce or something down below. And that's going to take you through summer months where it's actually going to help to manage the shade for it. It gets a little sunny and hot sometimes for lettuce in mid part of the summer. Be aware that some plants are allelopathic. That means that they inhibit other plants through chemical exudation from their roots. So sunflowers can actually stop other plants from growing around them. And I've seen that happen. I've seen it happen with some of the cereal grasses we grow as cover crops. So typically we don't leave them in the soil. The good thing about that is something like annual rye can inhibit quackgrass from growing if you keep putting it in year after year, so you have less of a problem with it if you use that as a cover crop. You do want to plant things that attract predatory insects, which we'll talk about in a second, but sunflowers would also fit that bill. And they also bring in pollinators. And then you want to plant those nitrogen fixing plants. This is what we're seeing is the specialized root nodules in this picture here. They have a rhizobacteria that actually takes in atmospheric nitrogen through the soil. And then that is fixed into a nitrogen plants can actually absorb, and then it helps feed the plant. So they can feed themselves as well as other plants around them. All right, so the big key here is prevent things from happening. Here's a picture of some floating row cover over crops. It keeps those flying insects away, lets air, light, and water through. It'll warm the soil underneath. You can use it on a seed bed of carrot to keep it moist, to keep it warm, to get those carrots to germinate well. You can leave it on to keep the carrot rust fly off of carrots and let them grow. Just make it loose enough that as the carrots grow, you can keep loosening and loosening, taking bricks off the edge to let the cover grow up with the greens. Keep that mulch on the soil to keep those weeds down. Chop and drop things before they go to seed. Keep your journal. Make sure that you're noting when you first see insects. The first cabbage worm butterfly I saw was that one I saw about 2 weeks ago in Des Moines, and then just one yesterday. So those are the first two I've seen, and that's about the right timing. I think they were a little later. I've seen them earlier in April before than I did this year. Don't assume that you're going to spray everything as a first response. Sometimes you have predators on your plants. So predatory insects can be killed by whatever you spray, even if it's safe for you and pets and children. It's not like a deadly chemical. It might be oil-based or soap-based. They're not immune to the spray either. And they lay their eggs on the same plants where their prey, where their food is. So you are creating habitat for them. You want to protect them. You want to know who they are. So there's many, many of them. We're not going to look at them all tonight or today, this morning. See, I don't even know what time it is. Less than 5% of the insects you find in a garden are actual plant pests. Most of them are beneficial or they're benign and they have no effect on your plant at all. They don't do anything to it. A spider can be beneficial. It can also kill other insects that, It can kill other insects that you want to have in the garden, but their rate of kill for things like that, they're eating everything. So there are, 95% other things they can eat. You want to build habitat for them. You want to know their life cycles so you can host them, or if they're good guys, or interrupt their life cycles if they're not. So you want to know who your allies are and who your pests are. This again is a picture of the complete different sort of sets of life for a lady beetle. They have a different, a little bit different life cycle. Um, these guys then something like a stink bug, which we think of sort of similarly because they're beetle-like, but a stink bug is a plant pest, and it is, well, some of them are beneficial, but the ones we see the most here are not. They don't go through this complete metamorphosis like that imported cabbage worm butterfly or the a rust fly or the leaf miner fly. They go through what we call sort of instar stages. They lay an egg, they hatch a little baby, and then it grows into bigger and bigger and bigger bugs until it becomes an adult bug. Looking for different things depends what you're looking for. Aphids are susceptible to many, many, many different pests or good bugs that we have in the garden, lady beetles in particular. The stage that eats them are both the adult and the larval stage. And what I don't have a picture of here is when they're pupating. If you ever see them stuck to the leaf and they are sort of halfway between this look here, sort of little ridged alligator look, and the adult lady beetle, that's a pupating lady beetle. They are stuck, they are vulnerable. If you pick that leaf, if you spray it, you're going to kill them. The larvae are running all over the plant. They stay on the plant, they eat aphids like crazy, they're very voracious predators. And then the eggs look like this. So you want to know the difference between these eggs and the imported cabbage worm eggs and the leaf miner eggs, because you want to get rid of the bad ones, but save and protect these good guys. So you need to know their life cycles. You need to know what they look like, and you are building habitat for them. So we want to invite beneficial insects into the garden. We need them to pollinate. We need them to eat our other insects. We as gardeners, we take advantage of natural systems. We build habitat in the soil so organisms can do their job and feed our plants. And so we do the same thing above ground. We're putting plants in that will attract things that will help us eat insects we don't want, help pollinate our flowers so we can get our tomatoes and our zucchinis. And actually, flowers all seasons are very important because there are life stages throughout most of the year in the Northwest. And we have very, very early pollinators like mason bees that come out and need things that are blooming at that time so that they have more food than just your fruit tree. Then we also need them late in the season. Honeybees are European and they developed in a different place where there are things that bloom more in the fall. We have fewer fall blooming plants native to the Northwest, so we supplement that. And that is why a lot of people who are beekeepers like knotweed because it blooms in the fall, but knotweed is also a noxious weed. And so, there's sort of like some management you have to do if you're going to have knotweed to feed your honeybees to make sure that it doesn't keep spreading. But there are other things, there are alternatives. Put in fall blooming crops to help those honeybees. Even if you don't have an apiary yourself, they're around your yard, you're going to see them. Have flowers everywhere, mix them in, and have them be seasonal all year long. You can put in bee baths, kind of like what you're seeing here. You can have just these little, things, the colored rocks. Remember that birds are also insect eaters, so many of them feed their young only insects, and the adults eat insects as well. Some of them are seed eaters, and they will eat weed seeds and keep your weed seeds down. So invite them in, and then the hummingbirds are pollinators. Families that we recommend to people we grow anyway: the mint, the carrot, and the daisy family. So Lamiaceae families, Some of them are native plants as well. There's many natives. At our till sale, we have a pollinator plant section, and a lot of those plants, they come from different growers, but many of them from Oxbow Farm, who specializes in native plants, and they do a lot of cool annual and perennial native plants that we bring in to sell to people. They're usually, we have smaller quantities of them, but they're usually the first things to sell out at the sale. And so you can find things in this family. We have a wild mint that's part of that. And there's several things. Flora attracts native fauna, so you're going to be catering to our native species if you have native plants in the garden. And here's the three families. We're going to look at those a little more closely. This is what the flowers look like. You got a sunflower, you got some dill flower here, and then you got lavender. You can see bees on at least two of these. I'm not sure if the dill does, but they're usually covered in insects, especially things in that mint family. You ever stand next to a lavender in midsummer, it's covered in insects, it's buzzing. So carrot family has many familiar herbs and vegetables. They have these umbrella-shaped flowers. They used to be called, instead of Apiaceae, which is reference to carrot, they used to be called umbelliferae because of that umbrella, an umbel-shaped flower. And they grow sort of all these clusters of little flowers together on this big sort of, head. So it looks like one big flower, and it's like a cluster, bunch of flowers, full of pollen. Lots of critters love them. Obviously, we see a lady beetle on here. Many things in that family that we grow. Cilantro, parsley, fennel, dill, lovage, angelica, sweet cicely, cumin, caraway, anise, celery, carrot. All of these guys are really commonly grown, some maybe not as much, but still, these are very familiar. You could actually just throw cilantro seed into garden beds alone, and that will make a big difference. Just let it grow. I'm not a cilantro eater. I'm one of those soapy taste people. So I don't like the taste of the leaf. I love the seed. I like coriander, but I don't like the leaf. But I love the flowers and I love the way it looks, and I will just grow it for that reason. And the pollinators love it, and these predatory insects also love it. In particular, parasitoid wasps. This is a critter that is super important. They lay eggs in aphids. Aphids are born pregnant, so they come out in thousands, and then they already have babies in them. They're born with a baby, and the parasitoid wasp actually injects an egg into the body of the aphid, which grows in there and then kills the aphid in the process. If you have bloated, tan-colored aphids on your plant, especially if you see a little hole in them, a little hatch, you're seeing ones that have been parasitized. They love this family. So just for that reason alone, you should have them. But this is also beloved of swallowtail butterflies and hoverflies. Sort of cool. There's also poisonous plants in this family: giant hogweed, poison hemlock, water hemlock. You want to be aware of that. You don't want those in your garden. Poison hemlock can kill the oils, and then the sun that are in this family can have that effect on you. If you're harvesting parsnip in the, it can burn you very badly. But the other ones, not so much. You don't need to worry about them as much, but you should always just be careful of that for that reason. Daisy family, we're growing these anyway. We grow these because we want cut flowers or we want color in our garden. We're also growing things like chicory and lettuce and tarragon because we want to eat it. Artichokes, all of these things are in this family. They're in the daisy family. They are also beloved by butterflies, but pretty much everybody likes these. They're good for cut flowers. They're good to eat. They're good to bring pollinators in. They set seeds. Things like the rudbeckia in this picture will create seeds that birds will eat in the wintertime, so leave them standing. That will bring birds into your garden. Lots of things in that family. Anything that's daisy flower shaped is going to fit that bill. And then My favorite is the mint family. So when you guys asked me to, the other thing I could say about, I love mint. I keep it all in pots so it doesn't invade my ground. And I have lots of different kinds. I bought, I think, at least one new one last night at the sale. Um, it's, but this family in particular, I have almost everything in here on this list. I don't have, what do I not have right now? I don't have agastache or hyssop, but everything, and I don't have the patchouli this year. That's an annual, but everything else I have, I keep, I let it bloom. Sometimes I harvest it before it blooms. Oils are better in these plants for culinary uses if you harvest before bloom, but leave some to bloom. They are major bee attractors. They will bring in all kinds of bees. They'll bring in cool, like golden digger wasps that, we have in our garden. They don't hurt you. It's not, the wasps we worry about are meat eaters. They're not going after pollen. So the guys that are on our flowers are usually not interested in you at all. They are very fragrant. The foliage is fragrant. They're great to use. They grow in sunny places. They're beautiful. They're super resistant to pests and diseases. There's very little that happens to them, and they just are gorgeous. So again, lavender, one of my favorites, mints, and thyme. Those three probably of that are some of my favorites. All right, so special considerations. We don't know ever how our weather is going to go. We have predictions from all our weather people. Sometimes they are spot on, and sometimes, they don't know except right before, when something like that June heat dome that we had in June a couple of years ago happened. That thing was crazy. That happened in a season where we don't get heat like that. Our plants were just leafing out. They were just blooming. They were tender. They hadn't built waxy cuticles on their leaves and they got burned up. Even if you were watering them fully, it wasn't a matter of not being watered enough. It was a matter of the sun intensity on the leaf at the weird wrong time of year and where the sun was positioned in the sky and how it was beating down on them. So the angle of the sun. So that was very hard on a lot of plants. This winter in January, we had that very weird freeze. A lot of things died that wouldn't normally have died. I saw plants just sort of turn to mush that had been perennials for years. We had some of our growers had just been starting things for our spring sale. It can be devastating for farmers that have to deal with this stuff. A cool summer, you can protect plants with that floating row cover like I showed you in that other picture. You can put season extenders, which often are sort of tubular teepees that go around a plant. You fill them with water. The water heats up during the day from the solar radiation and it lets it off at night, keeps it warmer inside. You can build cloches like in this bottom picture. You can have hoops that have plastic over them. And so you put things in the bed and you keep them covered in plastic. In the hotter part of the summer, you can remove that and put rime or floating row cover on it. And that will actually help keep it a little warmer, but give it more air. If you have something blooming under there, you need to have a way for pollinators to get in there to get to them. But I have grown basil under these things really and had really huge plants. Be a good thing to do with okras, maybe those hibiscus, things that are a little more tender. Plant where you can maximize heat. So if you have a rock area, rocks will also hold heat during the day and let it off at night. Brick walls can do that anywhere where there's a southwest exposure. And in the summertime, we don't get as many windy, rainy events from the southwest. We can get them, but it's warm enough that it's usually okay. In the summer, if we get a big heat event, be prepared with shade cloth. So I bought some shade cloth to protect my tomatoes when we had that heat dome. Once I saw it was coming, I was like, oh, I better get that. I don't want to ruin my tomatoes. So that can help prevent that blossom drop, but it also can just help protect your plants from burning and have the leaves burned. And it's just this like black shade cloth like you see up there. You can use it too for, cooling off during the hottest part of the summer, things like spinaches and arugula and keep them from bolting when the sun is too intense. Mulch well, water deeply, make sure you put the right plant in the right place to begin with. And then I mentioned the kelp fertilizers. Kelp-based fertilizers will help with stress management. When you're doing transplanting, I use that just after I plant something because it helps to settle the plant. It helps to build cell integrity and get those roots growing, and just seems to help them do better. All right, so that is what I had for you guys today. I have a question for you though, and you can answer verbally, you can answer in the chat box, however you want. What is one thing that you learned today that you think you will use in your garden?
I loved the deep dive more into the like the carrot and the mint family. Oh shoot, I just forgot the other one.
Well, me too. Carrot, mint, and daisy.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah, that's really fascinating about all those different families, and now I'm intrigued about different um living mulch plants that I can do um
Yeah.
for my garden. So I just got one tomato because like what you were saying, you were like, I need to slow down on the tomatoes, don't want like 57 of them, right? And so, but then I got 3 pepper plants. I was like, "Okay, Elizabeth, that's probably enough." That and also the sunflower, I had planted some sunflowers along, another garden bed that I had at a different house, and I didn't realize that it was depleting the growth of the other plants, so now I will plant those far away, probably
Yeah,
not
it's a tactic that plants use to keep other things from growing there so that they can colonize that space. Um, so they exude chemicals in the soil that inhibit other things from germinating. It doesn't stop them from growing, but yeah, it's a lot of plants. There's a lot of plants that do that.
well, thank you.
And we're seeing water in the morning and not evening, digital resources, kelp-based fertilizer, carrot, mint, and daisy families. You know, I think what I'm going to challenge you guys with that I think is really cool and fun, and I'm going to move us to our sponsors page, just so you know, we're managed at Tilt Alliance. That's where we work. It's a free service for you guys to call if you have questions. We are sponsored by these folks here on the right who are all part of government in different ways in King County to help um, pass a message on about natural gardening techniques. And but what I'm going to challenge you with, and what made me think of it was what you said, Elizabeth, and that somebody echoed about the daisy, mint, and carrot families, is I want you to like look at what you already grow and figure out what's in those families. You'll be surprised at how many you're already doing, because these are really basic plants we all grow anyway, right? We go to the sale, we go to the nursery, we're buying a marigold, you know, we're buying a lavender, you know, I'm gonna put parsley in my garden. So those are just classic sets of plants. And then the next thing is see if you have any natives that are in that family in your garden. If you have native plants in your garden, see if you can identify if you have anything in that family. Um, it's just a fun exercise to do.
And any way to learn more about how to provide um, your garden and also all the pollinators a better environment. That's so
Yeah,
wonderful.
you put a few links up here.
I did.
Uh-huh. Let's see. So let's see. Attract beneficial insects. So that PDF that's in the chat, that has a list, has sort of the principles we talked about on one side. On the back is a list of different insects that you want to attract that are good. And it has a list of plants that will attract them specifically that have been noted to be their favorite plants. Um, And if you just look at the Hotline website in the gardening resources or the Hotline resource section, there's lots of other things there about like straw bale gardens and etc. Soil resources, things that we talked about. But another place I want y'all to check out is Xerces Society. It's Xerces. I'll put that in here. Xerces Society. So these guys have a tremendous amount of information about native insects and beneficial pollinators. They work a lot with farmers, so they have a couple of books, Gardening with Pollinators, and I think the other one is Farming with Beneficials or something like that. And they have case studies of places that have done certain things to enhance, bringing these things in on a farm scale level to actually help manage pests in the garden. So kind of fascinating stuff, but their website has a ton of information, all kinds of downloadable documents, not just for the Northwest either. They talk about other areas. So if you have friends and family in other places, you can share that with them as well.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you guys for hanging out with us today.
Does anyone have any more questions? We would love to hear from you. Feel free to unmute yourself if you like, or enter in the chat box. I'm I was also thinking about just doing like cucumber and squash and just a bunch of culinary or medicinal herbs this year instead of going all out like I did last year. It was a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. Everything needs a little bit different attention, different kind of attention. So, you know, that's why I do specialize. I don't grow everything. I love beans. I like to grow green beans, but they take a lot of time because you got to be on top of harvesting. You got to check them every day. And I'm not going to do that. It's not going to happen. So
I was hoping to grow peas this year, but I think I kind of missed the
you could do the fall pea crop.
Oh,
Yeah, you can do ones where you plant July, August, and you'll get a fall harvest, or you need to keep up on water then, or you could do them in October and let them go over the spring,
oh,
and you'll get an earlier crop next spring.
thank you.
We
Oh,
can grow year round here, and it has upsides and downsides. Clubroot and brassicas, that's kind of one of the downsides. So you got to be aware of that. You need to be rotating crops, but you can grow so much. I mean, we can just have food we're picking. I was pulling green onions and kale out of my garden all winter. So
that's wonderful.
delightful.
We are very blessed here in the Pacific Northwest for sure. And I know that you had mentioned the climate zone areas changing, but that still just baffles me that it was that short of
Yeah.
time.
Yes. Well, I mean, climate change has affected a lot. It has really affected the climate. And so a lot of it is driven by that, but also just that, Seattle is a progressive city in the sense that, they're trying to keep a tree cover, but there's still a lot of construction that goes on here. And there's a lot of townhouses going up, and they have relaxed certain rules about how much green space they have to have when they do construction, or they give them different parameters that match the requirement. And they may do a vertical garden or put a vine on the wall of the building. That doesn't have the same impact as a tree does. And so that matters in the long run because you lose tree canopy and you're going to get more heat. So, we get more heat. What was interesting in that heat zone effect or that heat dome event was that places like Issaquah, Kent, the foothills, they got slammed. They were like at 115 degrees, where in Seattle we were like 107 or something like that.
Wow.
So it was significantly different because they were kind of backed up against the mountains, and that had an effect on them that was different, by itself. So yeah, I mean, all this stuff. The growers that brought all the plants in this year, struggled through so much stuff this year. It's been a cold, rainy spring, and they brought in these things that are blooming and beautiful. And you're like, how did you do that? Like they're they're not like big commercial greenhouses, right? They're not huge corporate plant growers. They are local farmers that live in the Pacific Northwest. And they just do this amazing work. And it just, it floors me, but it's just indicative of what we can do, right? They have greenhouses, certainly, and some of them have propane heaters in them, and sometimes they have lights and electricity over things. Um, but there's so much potential here. But I'm so like in awe of what they do. And we had 8 different growers that brought plants in that are just fantastic.
That is so
So great. Thank you. So Kate Pinard says one of my main issues is when to put out my tomatoes and peppers. They're getting pretty huge. What to do? Okay, check the map, check that digital resource, right? See when what the soil's looking like. I didn't look today. I can look while we're talking. So the Ag WeatherNet
26.
site will tell you, and that will help. So if you want to get them out now, you need to get that soil a little bit warmer if it's not quite up to, 55 and above. Once you get up to about 55, you're going to do better with them. Last I checked, it was 54, but that was about a week ago. 60 is ideal, but it takes a while to get there sometimes. Soil takes a long time for the soil to warm up, radiation underground, penetrating. So get the soil warm and put them somewhere under protection if you need to. Do not put your basil out yet. Peppers and tomatoes, I think you can experiment with.
Kay, you were saying something?
Um, what was I saying? Oh, I do have some 20-gallon fabric pots that I put on a raised table in the very most sunny place outside my house with a wall behind them.
Yes, use that. But
And then
maybe
cover
cover them
them?
at night. At night,
Yeah.
maybe. Yeah. I
Okay.
wouldn't worry about during the day. They're going to be okay. But it's those nighttime temperatures right now that we're worried about. I'm looking at the Seattle station. It looks like we hit the 60-degree mark at one point. It's come back down a bit. It's hovering at like mid 55 probably. So I think we're ready. I think we can do it. Watch those nighttime air temperatures right now. Keep your soil as warm as you can. Keep it mulched. Even in a fabric pot, maybe put some mulch around it. Also, that'll help it. A little compost even is all you need and something like that. That's going to warm up the top of the soil. Yeah, I'm ready to do it. I am. Mine are on the south side of my house against the wall in my gravel driveway. And I'm like, but I have wall of waters. I have those things that you fill the water tubes, and I'm going to put those in tomorrow. Maybe today. Actually, I have to work tomorrow. I have to be at the plant sale. So today, and then let them sit a couple days, and then you can stick your hand down in there and just even see if the temperature is changing or not.
I
But
have an instant read. I'll use that.
yeah, anything that will let light through and helps warm them. The fabric, the Rime floating row cover can change at least by 2 degrees underneath it. Plastic, sometimes a little bit more, 4 degrees maybe.
And that could be definitely significant to the survival.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Do you think they could get through June through all of May that way?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they'll be fine. And you may find that it gets warm enough that you can just like stop covering them. As long as the nighttime temperatures are, above 50, they'll be okay. But we dip down still sometimes right now.
39 just a few days ago.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a frost May 1st in different parts of Western Washington. Yeah.
No.
That's one of the latest frosts I've known in a while.
Oh, wow.
Our grow as we were bringing plants in, we were growers, the growers and I were talking about that, and we're like, they're like going, no, because they're trying to protect all these plants they're trying to sell right now, and some of them are farmers and they actually need to put them in their fields as well. So they grow plant starts and sell them, but they also grow farm. And that's devastating. They just put all their lettuces out. The lettuce will probably be okay, but they're trying to get other stuff out, and they're like, like straddling this line here, what they can put out and not put out. Yeah, I know. Seattle cracks me up. We're the Northwest. We are big tomato growers, and here we are in this crazy climate where we have to really like focus on, a plant that like only takes 75 days to harvest. Right? We can't just grow whatever we want. If it's 90 days or more, you may get a couple. You may get one big tomato, and that's it. So it pays to buy the varieties that will be successful here or grow those.
I can't remember what the tomato I got. Shoot, what were they? I think it was like shoot, I can't remember, but I got after I bought it, I was like, "Oh, well, hopefully this grows here," but all the plant starts from Marlene's are from Westwind Gardens. Um, but it's like the planet-wise uh like logo and stuff and organic, and I guess they actually only produce varieties that are going to be beneficial in the Pacific Northwest because I think they're Oregon based.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, so I thought about it and I was like, "Oh no." And then I was like, "Oh wait, it's good." But
Yeah.
yeah, it's like
We sell a few things that might take up to 90 days, that people really want to keep trying. And we have some 85 days. So some of those beefsteak types and heirlooms that people love, we still, like people have the right setting, they can be successful at it. We have a ton in our sale. We just do a lot. They're like 65 days, you're going to get some fruit. Um, One of the ones I bought last night is called Dancing with Smurfs, which
ah,
is an adorable name, but
I
it's a
love
little cherry tomato that's purple black. And it's ripe when you see the side that's out of the sun is green until it's ripe, and then it turns red. But the side that hits the sunlight interacts with the plant and creates a lot of uh, color in the plant through pigment, different pigments that are really healthy for you. So this whole line of plants was developed initially out of Oregon State University to develop tomatoes that have a lot of antioxidants in them. And they're purple like that. When you first put the plant out, the whole plant turns purple and you're like, whoa. And then it sort of settles down and turns a little more green. It still has a purple cast to it, but the fruit is just this deep dark purple all summer long.
Oh my
Really cool looking. And the
goodness.
name Dancing with Smurfs. Oh my gosh.
Exactly. Like how adorable is that? I must find one now.
I know. Super fun. I don't know who else sells them. I'm sure somebody else does, but we brought them into the till sale some years ago when I started seeing them in a catalog, and I'm like, oh yeah, I have that. That's too cute.
I mean, the name alone, but also that it changes color and
Yeah.
especially that brilliant purple too.
It's a cherry and it does well here, and it's a nice, well-behaved plant. It's easy, it's pretty, and it's easy to grow. It's pretty because it sort of has that purplish cast to it as well. Another one I bought last night that I'm going to try is called Brandy Fred Dwarf. So the brandy refers to brandy wine, and Fred refers to a plant called wild Fred, which is a variety of a wild tomato. So it's a cross between sort of a wild tomato variety and brandy wine, which is one of those big heirloom cherry tomato or heirloom slicing tomatoes that everybody wants to grow. Sort of that dark red tomato. And that cross is part of this project called the Dwarf Tomato Project. So they're kind of cool to check out. They are creating a whole series of dwarf tomatoes that won't grow really huge, but still produce good size, decent size fruit and get a good harvest. So I'm gonna see how that one goes. Brandy Fred Dwarf. We're gonna check that one out.
Oh, I'm so
Funny
excited.
little name. Yeah.
It is so adorable.
And
Oh,
I have, some standard ones like Carmelo is a pretty classic red tomato. Got one of those.
yeah, in years past, I didn't have that well of success with tomatoes, but now being able to host these fabulous classes with you, I've learned quite a bit over the years, and I think what it was that I had gotten a plant start too late, and so then, like what you were saying, like it has so much time to mature that by the
Right.
time it was ready, I think I got one teeny little green tomato. Like it
Oh,
they were supposed to be huge, and it didn't even go go to red because it got cold so fast. But
um,
I'm gonna do
yeah. Kay's asking about I never know how to say this one, the Principe Borghese. I've not grown those personally. They are a variety that's recommended for the Northwest. So yeah, should be okay.
ooh,
Again, anything that has like, sometimes I buy seeds for the growers so they'll grow specifically things I want. There's a company in Wisconsin, I think it is, that I buy seed from. So they're not in the Northwest, but they're northern. And so they have some really cool varieties that grow well. They have a different kind of summer than we do, but they're still, I pick the things that have shorter days to harvest from them. Um, so anything that's from, I've seen things as short as, well, there we sell a tomato called 42 days. So literally it's 42 days to harvest on the tag. That's what supposedly. So, we're talking a month and a half, right? That's not very long. You really need your tomato to get up to size. So yes, you do want to get that out right now and get it growing. But anywhere from that up to 85 days is usually pretty successful. And then you can push the window with that 90-day if you have the right setting, you treat them right. Um, Good heat, they don't want to be too hot. So you may need to cool them and shade them if it gets up to, like 100 degrees. They're really happy in the like 75 to 85-degree range. That's kind of their ideal temperature for tomatoes, air temperature. And then the soil at that point, when the air's that warm, and the soil's perfect for them. Yeah,
that's wonderful. Thank you.
you're welcome.
My goal is to make my own hot sauce at the end of harvest.
Oh, fun.
So
I grew from seed, what's it called? Oh my gosh, I just forgot the name. Um, but it's a paprika pepper that you grow the fruit. They're long.
Blue
Uh,
shower,
oh gosh.
blue shower.
Yeah, no, it's not that. I
Huh?
can't. No, there's a bunch of them, and I don't remember. I'd have to go grab one in the other room, which I won't do. But it's a long, narrow pepper. You grow it. You can eat it fresh, but you let it grow, and then you dry them, and
Is it
you.
Nora?
No, let me just grab one. I'll tell you. Hang on.
I really want to get some Nora,
ooh,
and I'm trying blue shower. Nora is the one that makes Spanish paprika.
It's
really?
called.
Which is
Yeah, it's called
different.
Hungarian paprika. Is what it's called. And
Hungarian.
so I have a bunch of those. So only bought like a couple other types of peppers last night. So most of mine are going to be the southern ones. So I can actually have enough to make, paprika that I'll have for a minute and
Oh,
not just one. But the hot peppers grow really well here. The heat units vary depending on the weather, certainly, and your soil. They have lots of impacts from different things, um, but they develop fruit easily because they're smaller than bell peppers. So a lot of people like those little mini bells because they are going to be more productive for sweet peppers, or the smaller, sort of longer um, things like Gypsy Queen or Jimmy Nardello's, stuff like that, that are smaller fruited. If you try to grow like the big, a big California Wonder pepper here, you don't get very big peppers. They take too long to develop that big. They're slower growing than a tomato.
But worth it. Ooh. I've learned so many different peppers today. This is exciting.
Peppers, they're so fun.
They are. They learning all this has put a pep in my step.
I love your puns.
Aw, shucks, thank you. I'm I'm really glad that you dig it.
Thank you both. It's been just so helpful. I'm
Good.
gonna
Have
sign off
fun.
because I have family stuff going on, but I surely do appreciate everything.
Of course.
Yes,
Thank you
you're
so much.
welcome.
Okay, great questions, and wish you all the um planting goodness for a great harvest. And also, Laura is going to be doing another class with us in July. And let me get that date. It's going to be the first Saturday. So that's July 6th. So,
Will you have a link for that, or do you have a link for that now?
yes, it's actually on our website. So if you just hop on our website, you can pre-register.
Okay, I will be there.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Cool.
much.
Enjoy. I hope we get another sunny day here in a minute.
I hope so. Aw, and Chris said, thank you. You're
You're
most welcome.
welcome.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Taylor. We're very grateful for all of you being here this lovely morning.